And what's caught your eye in the past week's news agenda? Well, joining us for our Newsmakers this week are Scott Farlow, who's President of New South Wales Young Liberals and Senior Advisor at CPR Communications, and Sam McLean of the advocacy group Get Up. Gentlemen, many thanks for coming in this morning, and obviously lots to discuss. Let's start off with the carbon tax. Well, the government unveiled its carbon price, minus a few details, for example, how much we'll be paying. Let's first hear from Climate Change Minister Greg Combet.
What we have said in relation to the policy issues is that every dollar that is raised from the carbon price mechanism will be used to assist households with any price impacts and will be used to support jobs in important industries in the trade-exposed part of the economy.
In the last election campaign, I talked consistently about how climate change was real, it was caused by human activity, that we needed to cut down on carbon pollution, and that the best way of doing that was to price carbon through a market-based mechanism.
I think that the Australian public are entitled to feel absolutely and utterly ripped off by this. I think if the Prime Minister wants to make, politically speaking, an honest woman of herself, she needs to seek a mandate for a carbon tax, and she should do that at the next election.
A scary Tony Abbott there. Well, Scott Farlow, I mean, does it really matter that she broke a promise, if you like, because we know that the Labor government was always going to introduce a carbon tax?
Well, I don't think we did know that a Labor government was always going to introduce a carbon tax.
Hasn't that always been Labor policy?
Well, before the last election, Julia Gillard came out and said that she wouldn't introduce a carbon tax. You had Wayne Swan say that he wouldn't introduce a carbon tax. Julia Gillard's exact words were that no government I lead. Well, is she still leading the government? That is the question. It seems like you've got the tail wagging the dog, with the Greens now dictating Labor's agenda.
Sam McLean, how do you think this looks to voters? Do they, like Scott, feel it looks bad?
I think that everybody's known since before 2007 that it was Labor policy to introduce a price on pollution. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that this Parliament is going down that road. I don't know how it looks to voters yet. I think the proof is really in the pudding. We haven't seen any detail yet apart from the fact that there will be a price on pollution. So we really have to see how efficacious that scheme is, what the price is, and how much investment it drives to clean energy.
Scott Farlow, is it actually possible to get this off the agenda somehow?
Well, Julia Gillard tried to keep it off the agenda before the election. That's why she went in there and said that there would be no carbon tax. It's been sort of the secret deal. Sam says that everybody has known that Labor was going to introduce a carbon tax. I think if you go out to the people in Western Sydney, the people all across Australia, very few of them thought that was part of Labor's election platform last time around.
Really?
I don't think that's true.
I think that's seriously true. I don't think for one second the people of Western Sydney went in there and voted for Julia Gillard and the Labor Party for a carbon tax.
I think you're right in saying that they didn't vote for a carbon tax. What was very clear from the get-go was that there was going to be a price on pollution and a way to tackle climate change. And we had a very clear choice at the last election between Tony Abbott, who said that climate change is absolute crap and clearly wasn't keen on taking action.
And a direct action plan on climate change.
And the other side. So, I mean, but you're right to say that all parties support reducing pollution by at least 5% by 2020. That's what the carbon price will likely do. So I don't think it's any surprise to any voters out there that we're now taking action and putting it into, some voters will be surprised this government's taking action after a few years
What I think voters will be surprised about is that they will be paying $300 extra for their electricity.
Who says it's going to be $300?
Well, that's the Australian Industry Group's figures. And if you look in New South Wales,
the government hasn't even announced the details yet.
So how does
that's based on a modest $26 to $30 price per tonne. But whatever happens, somebody will be paying for this. A carbon tax. Julia Gillard's comments about this will be an increase. This will be an increase for families. Families will have to pay more under this carbon tax. And I think people are very aware that what Julia Gillard's doing is where people have got high cost of living pressures at the moment. Julia Gillard's just adding to them.
Well, you just talked about the Australian Industry Group, who also put out a paper this week saying that energy prices will rise regardless of whether we have a carbon tax or not. And that the biggest factor in that is the uncertainty in the market, because we've had so much debate and so much toing and froing on this.
And
so the most important thing is to put a price on it now.
There will be a lot more debate on this. I want to move on because we've got lots of topics to discuss this morning. But there are some findings.
That was a good one to discuss.
It was, and I'm sure there'll be much more to come on that. There were findings this week from an independent inquiry into an alleged sex ring on board the HMAS Success in 2009. The Chief of the Defence Force, Air Chief Marshal Angus Houston, had this to say about that.
Behaviour of the crew of HMAS Success while on leave ashore during the March to May deployment was out of control and discipline had broken down.
Despite the Commission not being able to identify the existence of a sex ledger, there is certainly evidence to suggest that there was some form of sex bounty in place, at least relating to one individual. This is plainly unacceptable.
The report makes very sorry and confronting reading about the failure of personal conduct, about the failure of discipline, about the failure of authority, and about the inappropriate culture aboard the Success.
Gentlemen, is this surprising to understand how something like this can happen, Scott McLean? Sorry, Sam McLean.
That's okay, we'll both.
It's the two S's.
I'm not surprised, frankly, that this kind of behaviour exists in the forces, and partly because we've seen cases like this in the Australian military in the last 10 years, and also because you can understand that this sort of culture has been part of the Navy for as long as it's been around. What I think is really surprising is that it's taken this long to come out, and it's really time that we've got all of these problems out in the open, because too often we're seeing them come out 1, 2, 5 years later.
Scott Farlow?
Oh, look, I think that I agree with Sam on this one, that it is not surprising, but it is very unfortunate. The expression there's been a lot of discussion about drinking and alcohol use in the military, and especially in the Navy. The term drunken sailor doesn't come from nowhere, and unfortunately that's a culture that needs to effectively be addressed.
Okay, I just want to thank you very much. I just want to quickly move on to the tragedy in New Zealand. There's been a lot of commentators saying that the media doesn't care about this tragedy. Let's hear one of them.
Clearly there's a need and interest and public interest in giving good coverage to an event like this, and people want to know what's going on. There are public service issues as much as anything else. But when you get to the point of intruding on really hard moments of personal grief, when you get to the point of sending the brekkie crews over to sort of broadcast on location, then I wonder whether you're nudging close to a line. I wonder, just because you can do those things, should you?
That's the Drums editor, Jonathan Green. Scott Farlow, do you think the media has gone too far in Christchurch, or is that what the media does?
Well, look, it's a case of chicken or the egg. Is that what the public expects? Is that the public is, and your channel is testament to it, is obsessed with a 24-hour news cycle now. They're obsessed with being able to see everything that happens in the world when it happens. And for me, I think that in most of the cases, the news agencies, the journalists are just representing what is happening. There are, of course, some excesses in that program. At times I've seen a couple of journalists in channels standing there and having crosses to crosses to crosses to crosses. That may be a little bit of overkill, but I think in essence it is the demand of the public to know what is happening, and it's the concern of the public as well to know what is happening to their family, loved ones and compatriots in New Zealand.
Sam McLean, is there a criticism that the media tends to leave stories and leave those people they were so interested in just a day before? Have you heard that one?
Well, yes, but I don't understand it. That's the job of the media. We expect a lot of information about New Zealand, and we expect visual information. We expect photographs that are visual and show us exactly what is happening in an emotional sense. And we expect the same of our media to show us what's happening in Egypt and now in Libya. And we celebrate that when it happens. But when it happens in Christchurch, suddenly the boot's in the foot.
So perhaps this is just a natural frustration from people.
Look, I think it is, in general, what our society looks for. And, 24-hour news cycles, 24-hour news channels mean that we are obsessing on what is happening all around the world, and we are more connected than ever before, and we want to see that connection, and we feel that connection. We feel what is happening to those people in Christchurch, and we want to have that relayed on television. And I think it is the public, not so much the media, that is driving that, and it is the media's job.
Well, what about the people actually on the ground in Christchurch, though? Can we understand their frustration at having cameras pointed at them at their moments of grief?
Absolutely, and there's a line that can be crossed, but in the coverage that I've seen, frankly, I think it's been largely respectful. The media have been doing their job, and to hear people saying that journalists don't care about the subjects they're covering, I find jarring. I know journalists have been over there and had to leave their jobs.